This week's featured guest on the channel or on the Let's Get Growing show is Gary Pilarchik of the Rusted Garden. And Gary is the host, he's the host of the Rusted Garden. He's given viewers an unbiased information for them to use in their gardens. He covers all aspects of vegetable gardening from seed starting to tending, harvesting, cooking, and provides tools and ideas to battle garden pests and diseases. He has nearly 2,000 garden videos and is also the author of the book, The Modern Homestead Garden. So let's welcome onto the show our friend and gardener, Gary Pilarchik. Gary,
How are
awesome.
you?
Thanks for joining with us here on Let's Get Growing.
Very happy to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Awesome. So let's tell everybody a little bit more about yourself and your gardening channel.
So, my garden channel, The Rusted Garden, is, I think, 12 years old now. So, I started way back before I moved to this property that I'm on now and just wanted to make a video. And I was like, oh, there's a million videos on growing tomatoes. But I thought it was just a cool platform and got started 12 years later. I have a pretty good following, have a great passion for teaching. I just want people to get out into the garden, not be overwhelmed, and really get started growing vegetables. The best way to learn is to kind of, maybe watch a couple of my videos, listen to you a couple of times. But once you get the information, get out in the garden, start digging, start planting, and get started.
Yes, absolutely. Just get going, just get growing.
Mm-hmm.
That's the key, and like I find with gardening that there's just so many things, sort of things we touched on with the last guest and all of that. There's just so many benefits and so many things that's of value that you get out of gardening and the whole gardening experience. So let's take a little step back and talk a little bit about your garden history. What was your first gardening experience?
It goes back to probably second grade when my grandfather would come over. Back then, it was a six-pack of tomatoes in a brown bag. He'd bring some cucumber seeds, and he'd really quickly sort of turn the ground, get the plants in, and that was really my first exposure. And that's part of what I'm trying to do now is get people to try gardening because you don't know if you're going to like it or love it or have a passion for it unless you try it. So he got me started around second grade, and it kind of ignited a passion. So it stayed with me. And of course, as a kid, I loved planting, loved picking stuff, hated weeding and stuff like that. So never really got fully into it, but enough that I was like, this is wonderful. And then when I got married, got space, I started with a townhouse, got some tomatoes in, grew on a balcony. And every time, I kind of moved to a little bit bigger house, I expanded the gardening. And really for a good 15 years now, I've been gardening in, open space on land and just having a great time.
Excellent. And so you got started when you were younger. You moved, and it kind of developed a little bit more as you got to be older. What is it that you really enjoy most about that whole gardening experience that kind of kept you growing into your adult years?
I think about this a lot. It's you really have a blank canvas. Like I kind of see gardeners as
Mhm.
artists, and you get to go out there with the miracle of seeds. I can hold what 10,000 pounds of food in my hand in seeds. So we
Yes,
get to go out. It's amazing, right?
it is.
And I can kind of just plant what I like. I get to watch it grow. It's rewarding in the sense my energy starts turning ground, maybe. Um, put in the seed, and then months later, you've got beautiful plants that you can share that with family and friends. And I don't think anything really beats it. I mean, it's an opportunity to really create in nature.
Yeah. And again, it's just really amazing. I think one of the real fascinating things for me, and I've shared before on the show here, is that I started my love for plants in a sense started when I was younger. My mother was a house. She just grew tons of house plants. We never really had an outdoor vegetable garden or anything like that, but I got to learn to propagate and grow a lot of different indoor plants growing up, and I carried that on into my adulthood, and continue today. As you can see in the background, I love
Mhm.
that's the house is full of house plants. I still really enjoy that a lot. But when I took, like you were saying, learning that fascination of taking just this little seed, this little, just this little thing, putting it in some soil and then watching it grow, and after I got to grow my first vegetable plant on a balcony on an apartment that I lived in, uh, you know, my fascination with all of that really just kind of just exploded. And I was lucky enough to be able to move from that space into a little bit
Sure.
bigger space, still kind of small, but a bigger space. And when and that's the thing, when you get you get a real passion for growing, and that starts to develop, you can really find yourself, even no matter how much space you have, with just not enough,
Right.
right?
I knew what you were going to say exactly. You're always, you put in 20 tomato plants, then you're thinking, well, there's four I found on sale somewhere. I need to fit them in somewhere. So you're always expanding and maximizing.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm always finding myself not being able to get everything I quite want into my garden each year because I've filled it with all of these other things, and there's always new things that come up too
Right.
every single year that you want to get put into your garden and all of that as well too. But again, it's just that experience that you get, and we touched on that too again, and it just seems to be something that kind of shows up with most of our different interviews with the other gardeners we talk with, is that kind of peace and serenity and those sort of things that you get from growing a garden. I think that's one of those first things of value that I think I started getting out of my garden, even more so than the food I was growing, was
Right.
just just this um, not just a connection with, the growing space, the earth, the soil, all of that sort of stuff, but also just a better connection with myself and who, what my place in the world is as well, too.
Yeah. I mean, I also have, I'm a mental health therapist by trade. So I worked at Johns Hopkins for 15 years and helped people that had major mental illnesses. One of the things that all people lack are just great activities. Nothing
Yeah.
good happens sitting on a couch for 6 hours. So if you can get out into the garden, everything you're talking about kind of blooms in the garden, so to speak. Just serenity, peace of mind, just, you know, focusing all your senses on what you're doing in the earth and the smells of the tomato plant. It's just very relaxing and rewarding on so many scales beyond picking that tomato, like you're saying.
Yeah, yeah, it is too, and I think a lot of people really get that from gardening, and I think it's probably one of the reasons why it's one of those things that's just really kind of, I mean, I'd say, pretty good sized gardening community prior to what happened with the pandemic. But since that began, I think that people really connected with that when they had that, it was really kind of their only opportunity to get out and do something, was to kind of be in their yards and be in these spaces and developing gardening, and I think, it's really kind of exploded in that sense, because that's really one of those initial values you get from the experience.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that, nothing good really comes out of the pandemic, except people did have that opportunity to do something maybe they just were never taught. Because, I don't want to get on my soapbox about of
Right.
society. I think it's wonderful, but we lose track sometimes of not the simple things, because it's gardening isn't simple, but it's just a simpler way of life for your wellness and your health and everything that we're talking about. It's just getting out there. And it could be small, it could be big, it doesn't matter. It's the act of growing that just is really
Mhm.
rewarding. And that's something I try and stress to people. Like when I do videos and show my garden now, I show it in disarray, because I felt like
Yeah.
when I used to show it all nice and clean and perfect, it was stressing people out because they were like, my garden has to look this way. And my garden doesn't, a lot of the times,
Yeah.
but most of the times it's a mess. So that's how it is. But it's still a beautiful place. It doesn't have to be perfect.
Yeah. So as I mentioned before, I've been following you in your channel and all of your great gardening advice. In fact, um, just earlier in the show, I have a little segment called In the Garden, and we started that segment out by showing people my garden seedlings that I've been growing indoors under lights in this really cool PVC built apparatus and shop lights and all of that. And I do believe that was one of my very first videos of yours that I watched. It was complete. That whole garden state or plant starting station was
Yeah.
inspired by one of your videos early on that I saw, and I've been kind of following your channel and all of your gardening experience since then, and gotten so much out of what you do. I mean, you really have created a really great channel with lots of great information. And also, kind of one of the things I mentioned in your bio, though, too, is it's just you really discuss and cover things in real detail, and really kind of give a really good information on all sorts of stuff. What really kind of inspired you, ultimately to take, your gardening experience and start sharing that on YouTube?
It was really the fact that YouTube came into existence, maybe 15 years ago. And
Hmm.
I was really like, what is this, this YouTube, to really age myself. Um,
Yeah.
and I decided to make a video because it's something I like, kind of creativity and art wise. But I do have a passion for teaching, and I thought it'd be a great platform to try and create my own style, point of view. Not me talking 15 minutes about nothing and then saying, here's how you put the cucumber seed in. My videos are really focused on 5 minutes, 10 minutes, showing the person hopefully what they want to learn. And then I have a rambling series where I do like, a long-winded video. But really trying to get teaching down sort of to a quick science so that people could get what they need, get back out into the garden. And then I started really enjoying hearing the comments from people about what was helpful or what they're growing in the garden or their feedback on how I could do something better. And I discovered gardeners generally, they're a wonderful group of people. Like you don't really find bitter gardeners around, and it's such a
No.
good community, and it just kind of kept me going. So it's, I mean, I can't sit still, so it's good for me to be able to grab a camera, go out in the garden, do some video, do the garden work, and then I just load it up and have fun with it. And it started as a passion. Like my goal was never to get X amount of followers. Although I
Hmm.
always thought it'd be cool if I have 100, maybe I can get to 500. That's just kind of fun. But it just took off, and now this is what I do full time.
Yeah, I remember back when you got your first 100,000 subscribers.
Yeah.
That was a really cool celebration. And what are you at now? I mean, you're marching towards 700,000, which is really great, which, is, a testament to what you're doing. A lot of people are getting a lot of value out of the information that you're putting into the work you do and sharing your videos and all of that. I'm one of them. We've got, several people here in the chat, who've talked about how much they've gotten from your channel as well too. So really great work and all of that. So out of all the things that you're doing in your garden and all of that, because I know you cover so many things and all of that, what are some of your favorite things in the garden to grow?
So, I mean, that is another good question, which always changes. And I had to think. I actually just like the act of growing. So I
Yeah.
love placing the plants in a design and seeing what comes to be. So I have lots of different trellising. So I love building. I have a cattle panel trellis. It's 4 feet wide, two of them next to each other, so it's 8 feet wide. 8 feet wide.
Yeah.
So I love setting that up with cherry tomatoes, and then the trellis gets covered with cherry tomatoes, and you can walk through the tunnel and come out the other end with a bowl of different colored cherry tomatoes. So
Yeah.
that's the kind of stuff I like. So I like kind of getting everything into the ground, getting it set up, sort of having some creative design to it, and just really letting it grow. What I look forward to every year is tomato, cucumber, and onion salad, vinegar and oil,
Mm,
slicing that up fresh from the garden, and I look forward to that every year. If I could only grow maybe three things, that's what it would always be.
be those three, huh?
Yeah.
Awesome, awesome. Anything that you don't really grow or you've given up on growing, or anything that's presented any sort of constant challenges for you?
Well, I was listening to you earlier talk about the cool weather crops going into the summer and how they're
Mm,
bulking, the broccoli and all that. So
yeah.
that was a challenge. Every year I try and do it, spring to summer. It does exactly what you said. It gets too warm. So I just wanted to let people know we could do that in a second season from late summer into fall. So if you have trouble with the warmth coming in summer too quickly, you can grow those again. Nothing, I've had to figure out how to do things. Like I can't grow rhubarb. I just put it in again. One plant is dead, the other one's taking off. I used to not be
Right.
able to grow ginger. I figured that out. So I like kind of problem solving. And it might take 3 years to figure out the right location. And then, you move on to the next one.
Yeah, exactly. And I've talked about this before on the show as well too. One of my constant issues in or the things that I'm still working to try to figure out are brassicas. I just for some reason, they just give me the most trouble. I end up going to one of my local nurseries and getting starts because it's really my goal, kind of as we were saying earlier, to be able to start things from seed because I love the whole process of being able to do things from start to finish when it comes to growing things. But brassicas always seem to be an issue for me. But this year I've actually got some cabbages, which are really looking good, and the broccoli, which I ended up again going and getting starts. That's looking pretty good. But but yeah, it's one of those things that, even though I'm not finding as much success with it, say over the last couple of seasons, I remain determined to be able to figure it out, to learn that process, and be able to have future successes when it comes to growing those sort of things.
Yeah, and you can, like a lot of people don't know, you can, you're not growing broccoli for this, but you can eat the leaves. You can eat the cabbage leaves before the head forms and stuff like that. So you'll definitely get something out of it, but it is kind of sticking with it and figuring it out. And just in case you were kind of talking about the difficulty with the brassicas, when you're seed starting them indoors, I just discovered this recently. If your temperatures are like in the upper 60s, they tend to get real leggy and floppy in the house. So
Yeah.
they do really well getting a cool period outside or being put outside at night. And that cold weather slows them down. So you get these really nice, stocky transplants. But that's a good example. For years, I was growing them and I was like, I thought the lights were too close or there wasn't enough light, and then finally
Mm,
figured out it was just temperature. So they need much cooler nights as they're
yeah.
growing by seeds to be nice and stocky and then, develop for your garden.
So probably maybe seed starting in like a covered environment or something like that outdoors, kind of, not get them too cold, but get that cool temperatures for them.
Yeah, I think that works best because they can actually take a light frost and even, even a heavier freeze depending on their size. So they just love that cool weather and that's what keeps them nice and stocky.
Yeah, yeah. In fact, it was last year I was growing broccoli in these wicking 5-gallon bucket containers, and I had a whole bunch of different broccolis and varieties growing, and we ended up getting this freeze that was kind of unexpected, and it lasted like the freeze must have lasted a couple of different days. And when you're you're growing something in a container like that versus the ground, that just becomes a solid rock. And I
Right.
was worried the whole time. I'm like, oh man, this thing's frozen solid. You can knock on the soil
Yeah.
and just like, and I was just really surprised that, come a week later, as that all thawed out and everything, that the broccoli just had no problem with it. Just, it thrived right through that whole situation. And again, something that, we're constantly learning about. But I was worried there for a minute that that was going to actually be too cold for them.
They're solid. I mean, some of the plants would die out, but the broccoli, Brussels, cauliflower is a little bit weaker than broccoli. But I mean, it's a perfect example of why you can grow into winter because these plants can really take that cold.
Yeah, yeah, and that's a really great idea too. And as I was mentioning, I didn't have quite an opportunity this last year in order to do that sort of situation, as you're saying, use that second season on those, because of a situation I had here at home and whether or not I was going to be able to stay in my garden spaces. But that's ultimately the same goal this year, is to be able to do that sort of situation and try to find out, if I get better success in that second season with some of these greens and brassicas and things like that, as you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, and the other thing too is just to throw in there an easy growing vegetable for new gardeners are radishes. Radishes you can grow.
Yes.
They will mature from germination in 25 to 40 days. So fall and even winters that are mild, you can keep the radishes going.
Yeah, they're actually one of those things that I always suggest to people if they're just getting started with gardening, because I think it's a really good to like get and grow certain things, not only that you're going to like and enjoy, but also grow some things that you're going to get some successes with. Early successes help kind of keep you going with certain things, and I think radishes, and or even if you're growing with children and you wanting to teach children
Mhm.
too, about gardening and all of that, because of how quick they are, like you said, you know uh, a quick turnaround on growing something from a seed to pulling it out of the ground is a really great thing when you're growing with kids, and also again to get those early successes, because they're not hard to grow. I mean, I just take my radish seeds and I just pretty much toss them into wherever I'm going to grow them. They pretty much take care of themselves, and I just thin them out a little bit later on, and that's the only thing I really have to do for those.
Now, some people, I'm going to say, so when we were talking about things that are hard, for years, all I grew was leafy greens and no
Hmm.
radish. And I was over fertilizing. You can use compost and a little bit of fertilizer, but I was just
Yeah.
jacking the nitrogen up so much that I never was getting the bulbs. And just like you said, if you're just scattering them and throwing them and kind of letting them go, that's what radishes love best. And you get a nice radish that way. They just don't need really any kind of feeding.
Yeah, exactly. I think, and again, too, maybe we can touch on that a little bit too, is that idea of, there's so many things out there when it comes to, amendments and things like that that we can put
Mhm.
into our gardens and all of that. But really, gardening can be a lot more simplified by not really worrying about a lot of these sort of, I don't know how to say it, things that these products and things that are out there, because all you really do need for most successes in the garden is some, either some compost, simple things like worm castings are really great and that sort of
Right.
stuff. And really, the all I ever use, just a couple of times a year in my garden, besides compost and worm castings, is just just kind of a balanced, dry, organic fertilizer. And I just kind of spread that around a little bit, and I always find that I don't need anything more really, and I don't need to put too much thought into these all these other amendments that they have out there.
Well, I call that the commercial world of vegetable gardening. And
Hmm.
in the beginning, when I was doing this, I am guilty of maybe sort of being brainwashed into that needing more. So I've simplified, just like you said. And a great example is when you go to a big box store and you see the organic dry fertilizer, which is what you're talking about. And I agree, you just need one bag. Whatever's on sale, it's always the same stuff. But you'll see tomato tone, you'll see plant tone, you'll see flowering, fertilizer, you'll see leafy green, you'll see pepper, you'll see like 13 different bags of fertilizer with the NP and K might be like a 642 or a 353. We
Hmm.
don't need to worry about that. The garden, buy any bag, whatever's on sale, use that. You don't need specialized fertilizers. And the reason I bring that up a lot is because sometimes the barriers for new gardeners to get involved is they think they need all these products, and
Hmm.
you just don't. And so I like to kind of challenge people. Of course, if you do a little more phosphorus, a little more potassium, you might get more blooms. Or as you get better at gardening and more experience, and you want to tweak fertilizers, that's fine. But to get started, you don't need that. The dry granular, a basic water soluble, and like you said, if you can make compost, use compost. It's well
Hmm.
below a 111 NP and K, gives your soil everything it needs, the plants everything you need, and you're golden using
Yeah, yeah, that's and fertilizers is one, but all sorts of different things. I mean, when I think it can be a real deterrence to a lot of people when they look at all of these various garden products and all these sort of things that are out there, and you can. I mean, if you're just really going wild with a lot of those sort of things, you can end up spending a lot more
Right.
on all of these other things than what you're going to be getting out of your garden, you know. And gardening can be really inexpensive, and probably, you know, really ultimately should be, you know, without all of these other, you know, just all of this stuff that's out there. You know, garden industry is a huge industry. It's, you know, billions and billions of dollars of all sorts of things that we probably just don't need, you know, just some simple boxes, some simple containers, you know, creating a simple compost
Right.
pile, you know. And again too, like you're saying, whatever kind of you know, balanced, you know, dry organic
Yeah.
fertilizer just to give a little bit of food. But if you're doing things right in your garden and you're keeping things kind of simple in an organic way like that, you know, that soil life is going to build itself and really, you know, kind of create the sustained environment to create you know, successful plants.
And I'm always respectful that not everybody. I mean, I started with a townhouse with a little shade and a deck, so I couldn't have a compost pile. But you can also, if you're not putting any chemicals on your grass, when you take your cuttings, just put an inch or two of the fresh cuttings on your beds, let them dry, turn brown, then you put another inch or two on. That is actually a way to compost right around the beds. Keeps moisture in, the plants love it. Soil life worms chew it down, break it down, and you're actually composting slowly over the season. Just make sure you're not spraying weed and feed or anything into your lawn, because that can
Yeah.
transfer over to your garden and impact your plants.
Yeah, just use that as a mulch, basically,
Mhm.
help build the soil life, and then it, yeah, again, like you said, it just will break down, go right into your garden, as well as, you know, some people use like you know, wood chips and things like that as well. You know, just some good organic mulches that'll just kind of break down and help create and sustain good soil life.
Yeah, for sure. And again, it's something you don't have to learn everything about gardening when you get started. Just get started, and you'll learn all these pieces that build a wonderful soil, that build a wonderful, garden for your
Mhm.
plants.
Yeah, exactly. And as I mentioned earlier too, you know, gardening is a constant learning process. And again too, there's, you know, there's not too many things that are really hard and fast when it comes to gardening. You know, there's a lot of give and take when it, you know, it comes to experimenting and trying and doing different things. And I think that's really important for people as they're growing in their gardens to, you know, kind of, because we all grow in different places, you know, in
Right.
different environments and climates and all that sort of stuff too. So what works for me might not exactly work for you that well, you know. But you know, getting out and trying things is probably the best bet for, you know, trying to figure out how it's done and how it grows, and get some of those, you know, early and long-term successes.
Yeah, I mean, use your information, my channel, whatever you find online to get you going in the right direction. But
Mhm.
just you're going to veer, but as long as you're going in that direction, you're going to get something out of your garden, and you can always adapt and change it up the next year.
Yeah, exactly. You know, you know, especially, and once you start figuring things out, once you start getting some successes, those are, you know, those are things that you just build on, you know, year in, year out. And again, like we also mentioned too, you know, one of the biggest things I always recommend to people, even though you're so tempted to grow anything and everything that's out there, try to keep it a little bit simple too when you're getting
Yeah,
started as well, you know, because, you know, building off of successes and expanding is the best way to go.
I agree. I agree.
Awesome. Awesome. Excellent. So let's talk a little bit. You mentioned there too, actually, just a minute ago, that you were, and I remember first starting watching your channel, that you had like a balcony, and you had some kind of a cool small backyard kind of space that
Mhm.
you had. But you've taken and moved from that space now into a much larger space. You want to talk a little bit about that move and your newer spaces that you're growing in?
Yeah. So my kids moved on to college and stuff and out of state. And about that time, my wife and I were like, well, let's move, because they're going to be different places. So I was lucky enough after, saving and doing things for, a couple decades to move to 2 acres. I'm in a 1867 farmhouse that we upgraded and stuff. And I got this perfect rectangular property where I could take everything I did before and kind of create from a blank slate. So I've had a great time designing the fencing, the garden beds. I have two gardens actually. Then I have a bunch of edible landscapes, um, a little wooded area. I've got an orchard going, enough to keep me busy and overwhelmed in a good way. Um, and now I have tons of compost. And that's why I'm always sensitive to compost because I never had the space.
Yeah.
But I'm always like, well, what kind of channel would I be now if I came on and said, just make your own compost, put 6 inches in your bed, walk away, you're done. You're wasting money. But you can't do that because, like you were saying, all of our gardens are different. We're all coming from different places to grow, different budgets, different amounts of time.
Hmm.
So my goal is to help people just enjoy growing plants to whatever fits into their lifestyle. In my book, the Modern Homestead Garden, it was kind of taking modern life into, you know, I don't know what's the right word. Well, just being
Hmm.
practical. You got your modern life, but
Yeah.
you can sort of go back to having a garden. But how do you kind of blend it into, our current society right now? And, the short version is you do it at your own pace, and you learn the skills and you do more. And when you can expand, you get bigger. But just start somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Just get started. As we say here, let's get growing, right?
Yeah, for sure.
All right. So, in fact, you touched on it there too. Let's talk a little bit about, in fact, I got my own copy right here, the Modern Homestead Garden. So, what kind of inspired you to write a book of all things to do? Can't
Yeah,
imagine that it took up some good time trying to get
it's a great experience when you're done.
when you're done,
It's
is what I
yeah,
hear from a lot of
when
the
you're
authors
done,
we've had.
it's a great experience. But the publishing company and the people are wonderful. And it was actually at the height of COVID, so it was a stressful time. But the book was finished, and it was really designed a little bit what I'm having trouble saying. I don't know why, but it's taking modern life, blending it with gardening, and it creates your homestead. And it's really about a different perspective. Instead of waking up, go to work, buying food at a grocery store, going out to eat, going to sleep, waking up, rinse and repeat, how can you integrate a homestead, mentality into your life? As little as
Yeah.
or a little, piece, maybe it's a windowsill or your deck or something. How do you incorporate that into your life so that no, you're not living out of your garden, you're not going off grid, but maybe you're adding herbs to your dishes, or maybe you're adding, a side dish eventually, or maybe you're creating salads. But just bringing the idea of your home is your homestead, not just a place to wake up, go to sleep, go to work, come back, and just have fun with it. And the book shows you how to do things on different scale: container gardening, larger scale gardening, herbs, just about everything. And it kind of mirrors my channel too with all the stuff that I teach on there. But it's a nice place to have all the information to really get started and, have the confidence to feel like you can grow something.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a really great book. And again, like all of the different things that you have on your channel and all the information, just really good stuff. And it's a great place for folks to get a lot of good advice. And talking about advice, you got any good advice or tips or anything for someone who's just getting started gardening?
So you kind of mentioned it already, and it's don't overplant. So that's the first
Mm.
thing. Is don't overplant your first year because you have to imagine you're going to be into July and August when your plants are big and you have to tend and care for them. So you may want to grow 6 or 8 tomato plants, maybe start with three, and just try and keep it a little bit simpler to start so you can kind of see the whole process. With that being said, too, if you're growing in containers, the biggest mistake people make is, you have a nice little tiny tomato seedling that's about 8 inches tall, and then you get this pot that's maybe 12 inches wide and 12 inches deep. And they look perfect together to start. But in 6 or 8 weeks, that tomato plant, that root system is going to outgrow that pot. It's
Yep.
going to suck the nutrients out, the moisture out. You can water it, 3 hours later, it's dry again. So you really have to match the pot size to the mature size of your tomato plant or the vegetables that you're growing. And some of that, you can check my channel out for that, or you can look for different places. But you always want to be thinking about how big is this plant going to be when it's mature?
Hmm.
Can I tend it? and is it in the right pot? And that's probably two things I think that help gardeners out. Um, the other thing I always talk about is there's no perfection. Like the whole idea is to manage down pests, manage down diseases. You know, the garden wants to give, it wants to grow, and you're going to get something out of it. But you can't get discouraged because you get powdery mildew or you get aphids. That's just something
Hmm.
you have to learn. And every garden's going to have its own pests and problems.
Yep.
And that's part of what you have to learn too. So don't get it in your head that you're a failure or you're doing something wrong. Any garden, I always laugh, any gardener that says just grow organic, I never have a pest or disease. Maybe
Yeah.
there's truth to that, but it's because they probably have no pests or diseases in their area. You know,
Yeah.
it's just the way it is. You know, you're going to get the problems.
Yeah, I grow organic and I get plenty of pests and plenty of diseases to deal with, all sorts of them. And again, like you said, it does depend on our space. It depends on, where we're growing, as far as specific climates and regions and things like that, on all what we're going to be dealing with. And similar
Sure.
to what we touched on earlier, one person might have, as Paul had earlier, voles that he
Yeah,
deals with. I don't got voles I got to deal with. I don't got deer I got to deal with. But man, I can get it. I can get an infestation of squash bugs like you wouldn't believe. We talked about earwigs. Earwigs. Oh my gosh. The most creepiest little bugs I got to deal with all over the place. All that stuff. Powdery mildew, as you mentioned, too. All sorts of things. But I think that's really great advice, though, too, and something that I try to, relate to people as well, too, especially if you're just getting in started gardening, is that these are things that are a part of the natural, you know, system of plants and gardens and things grown outdoors. Is all of these sort of variables and part of, I think, in a sense, the fun of learning about gardening is learning and dealing with some of these
hmm
challenges. I mean, I try not to let it, break my heart too much, when the aphids tear something down or something, and I want to, or something got past me on some other sort of problem, is to, again, we talk about keeping garden journals here on my channel and stuff so that we can, keep good notes on, time of year when we're dealing with this stuff, and different methods that we've tried to, take care of them and work on that from a year to year basis, you
I
know.
think that, I mean, that's perfect. I just want to highlight what you said. You don't know as a new gardener what's coming. But if you
Mhm.
can take notes, like you said, and say, aphids show up this date, powdery mildew this date, then you can put a plan where you start spraying, 2 to 4 weeks before they typically show up. And then
Yeah.
you can manage down the destruction. But a lot of people are manage down the damage. A lot of people don't keep that journal. So it's so important to take, because I can't
Mhm.
remember what I ate for dinner 2 or 3 days ago. So there's no way I'm going to remember next year when the aphids show up or something. So taking notes makes a huge difference. And also taking note on what you're spraying, what works and what doesn't work really makes
Yeah.
a difference. Because eventually you'll learn it's like these two diseases, these three pests, and then you figure out a way to work around it.
Yeah, and you might not get quite what you wanted or expected out of your garden for that season, but it's, again, too, there's one thing to be able to grow something from a seed, grow this plant up and be able to possibly harvest something out of it. There's a lot that we get out of that, but I think that in the longer run of the gardening experience, taking some of those things and challenges, we might not get the harvest we want. The plant might not be healthy enough, whether it's a disease or a pest or weather issues or, all the different variables. But when like I said, if you're keeping a proper journal and you start to defeat some of those things and you start getting successes because you've
Mhm.
done that, that's another just empowerment of being a great gardener. Not necessarily a master gardener, but you're mastering gardening, in a sense by doing that, and that's really kind of fulfilling as well too.
Yeah, I think you end up you master the space that you're growing in. And you're not going to find
Exactly.
all that in videos and through reading and research. You'll have an idea. Like, I don't get earwigs. I couldn't even probably pick one out, to be honest with you. But people get them and they're terrible. I
That,
just don't get them here
yeah,
for whatever reason. But
that's good.
yeah, so I'm grateful. I'm going to knock on wood because I said last year that I've never had a vole, and voles roll
Oh,
into my garden.
oh
So
my gosh.
they're
Yeah.
okay now, yeah. Um, but you're not going to know until you get growing. And I just want to add in too that some of the things you learn is like you say your cucumber plants go in May. The cucumber beetle comes about now. It wrecks them in June. You learn that you can use a dust and it controls the cucumber beetle. But you can also rip out that cucumber plant, put in transplants or new seeds, and you can plant through the cycles of insects and different diseases because they go away. And a lot of
Mhm.
people think, well, I lost, I failed, this cucumber's gone, and they get rid of it and they get discouraged. Well, just plant again, because that July planted seed for cucumbers will start producing at the end of July because it's so warm and it wants to grow, and it'll grow into
Yeah.
August. And you can plant again in August. So you can keep your crops, a lot of them rotating in, and you plant right through the problem cycles.
Yeah, exactly. And just another one of those things that's, fun to figure out and grow through the different experience and learning processes with all the sort of aspects of gardening, because there's a ton of aspects of gardening. And I think that's one of the things that makes it so much fun is that there is so much, as far as not just the varieties and the different things that we can grow, but the different methods and different, you know, uh, uh, styles of growing, all sorts of stuff. And it's just one of the things that makes the whole kind of gardening experience really fun and really kind of a little bit more on that is that I also kind of relate gardening to baseball. I'm a big
Right?
baseball fan, and or just most any sports is all is that we might not have the best season, with our team that year, but it's similar to gardening. There's always next year, and
Right.
then there's all that sort of thing. It's something that we get to do year in and year out, and building on some of the successes we have this year can create an even more successes the next year. So again, don't get discouraged by the different situations you could deal with in your gardens.
Yeah, I totally agree. And one more thing I want to add that kind of goes with this and make something for new gardeners. When you create the organic sprays that you see online, and I always thank people for trusting me, always test spray because I'm saying this
Yeah.
from history, where I've
Hmm.
made a spray and I've sprayed the entire plant, and then the next day I've defoliated it, like the leaves are dying. So
Right.
as you're learning about your garden, even though a spray may work for me and it may work for you, for some reason it may not work in somebody else's garden. Or you use the wrong soap. You use dish soap, or I'm using maybe the Castile type soaps or something.
Yeah.
Anyway, any spray a couple of leaves, wait 48 hours, see if it does any damage, and then go out and spray your plant. That will save you a lot of heartache. And just because the spray works on, say, a kale plant or the brassicas, which are really tough leaves and can
Hmm.
take lots of sprays, you then may take that spray and say, well, I'll just spray it on my tomato plant. Well, those leaves are a little bit weaker. So you have to test the sprays on each of the different plant kind of varieties. And then once you get them, this is a spray I can use pretty regularly.
Yeah. You got any sprays you recommend? Any spray recipes or anything
Yeah,
like
I
that that
mean,
you
I,
use a
I
lot?
have a lot of them. If you go to my channel, I always say,
Yeah.
please just watch the video, but I'll give you the recipe. I mean, I can show you too, but this is hydrogen peroxide, 3%
Yeah.
hydrogen peroxide. If you spray that directly on your plants, you're going to defoliate. How do I know that? Because I did it. So 1 part hydrogen peroxide, 6 parts water makes a great spray to clean your tomato plants, and it stops early blight and leaf spot. So I can plant
Yeah.
tomatoes much more closely nowadays. And please, the Rusted Garden, Rusted. You can see my YouTube channel. Just look up hydrogen peroxide. I will. I don't think it's because of my age. I think it's just because I always do it. I can't remember the recipes exactly. So they're
Yeah.
all written on my sprayer. So when I go out, I
Yeah.
have like peppermint oil, 2 tablespoons, or um, hydrogen peroxide, 1 to 6 ratio, or 6 to 1 water to hydrogen peroxide. But that's a good way to do it too. Is write it on the spray on the sprayer so that you don't mess up the routine.
Yeah.
But hydrogen peroxide is wonderful. I think it can be used on all plants. I haven't tested it all out, but it's a really inexpensive way to manage stuff on your plant leaves.
Yes. Awesome. Yeah, I'm gonna have to use a little bit more of that myself too, and as well as a lot of the other great advice that you give on your channel. It's just, again, like I said, I've been just a big fan of YouTube, gardeners and gardening. For you know, I don't know. I started my garden 13 years ago or so. It's been when I first started after my first plant I grew on a balcony. And once I had that success with that plant, I immediately, again, like I said, wanted to grow everything and moved into a space where I could really start to expand my garden. But I utilized all of the great advice I got from all these different great gardeners on YouTube. And your channel was one of those first channels that I ran into and have kept coming back to in order to get some really great gardening advice. So as you can say, I've been kind of a fan for many, many years, and really appreciate everything that you do and taking the time you do to make your videos, writing a really great book. Um, I would, actually, I did want to mention this. As you mentioned, you worked in the mental health space and all of that sort of stuff. And I think I've seen you post and talk about it before, but maybe that's a good suggestion for your next book, writing a
So
little bit about something like that.
yeah, so I actually have another book coming out called Growing an Edible Landscape. That's going to be out in
Okay.
November.
Oh, awesome.
And I've kicked that. So, I mean, the short version is you hook up with editors and book companies, and they kind of want you to write something that will hit the target audience. And I wanted to write a book that really highlighted how to grow, but also at the same time integrated how it benefits your mental health. So let's just say that's on the drawing board still. Um,
Yeah.
but it might be something that I do independently and I just write an ebook on it because I really believe in it. And it
Hmm.
doesn't have to be like mental health is not a mystical thing where you go into support groups and everything is, kind of gets that funky kind of stuff that people shy away from. Mental health is really part of your life. We all deal with anxiety and depression at different levels. We all um, need help at times. But a healthy activity like gardening pays dividends towards your wellness, towards your mental health, reducing anxiety, improving mood, and stuff like that. And I would just like to write it in a way that people feel comfortable, talking about it
Yeah.
and getting something out of it because it shouldn't be a mystery. It shouldn't be something people sweep under the rug. I'm,
Yeah.
I'm going to go breaking down my therapist soapbox, but there's
That's
nobody's mental health that is always perfect. Just like there is
hmm
never a perfect garden with no pests and disease.
yeah.
It may look okay on the outside, but something's going on the inside. But gardening is a great way to really improve your wellness. So
Yeah.
maybe
Yeah.
maybe it'll come out as an ebook or something like that.
Yeah, yeah, I really encourage it because I think you would probably be a really great person with some really great insights on that, on the mental health end of the gardening experience, and be able to really give some people some really good information when it comes to all of that too. And I would really look forward to something like that as well. And again, too, I want to encourage anybody who's watching the show to get down in the description below, find a link to Gary's channel, The Rusted Garden, and follow along with all of his really great gardening tips and all of the different things that he's got going on the channel there as well. And Gary, I really want to thank you for taking your time out of your weekend to join with us here on the show.
I had a great time. I'd love to come back in the future. This was a lot of fun. Aside from growing and creating, I love just talking about gardening. I just came from Freetown Farm where I volunteer.
Yeah,
Zipped over here, shot a quick video that's coming out later today on trellising. And
yeah.
I had a blast talking with you. So thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. And like you mentioned, you got a new book coming up. So after the new book or something like that, maybe we'll have to have you back on and talk about it as well.
Wonderful.
Awesome, Gary. Thanks again. And again, everybody, get down below. Check out the link to his channel. Go check him out. Gary, we'll see you again soon.
Have a great week.